This episode of The Imperfects has some pretty colourful language in it, so we're just giving you a bit of a language warning in case you've got kids around or you just don't want to hear those kind of words. You might want to skip this one for now.
My name is Alira Potter, and I'm a proud Yorta Yorta person, and together with The Imperfects, we like to acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia. We acknowledge their continued connection to land, waters and culture. We pay respects to elders past, present and emerging, and also acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded, and this always was and always will be Aboriginal land.
Ooh, twice in a week. Yes, this is part 2 of a special Academy of Imperfection with guest lecturer Johann Hari, an episode that was recorded prior to the passing of Queen Elizabeth II, which is important to know because Her Majesty does come up in conversation, as does the Dalai Lama, again. So sheath your jousting lances and enjoy part 2 with Johann Hari.
So just on this, we had a really great question this is our second question so far from our
Oh yeah, sorry.
from Max, and I think it's a nice time to ask this because the app freedom is a good example of what we're after here. But the question is, can you give any advice on how everyone can better utilise their social media channels to promote self-growth and connection, given how important knowing yourself and communication is for resilience?
I would say don't promote them on your social media channels, promote them in the world, right? I say actually, when they're channeled through social media channels, they'll become a form of self-display. I feel this with my own social media. So as you know, I spend half the year off social media. I have very strict boundaries between me and social media. So
how did you do that? How did you?
So I've got an assistant. I've got to change all my passwords,
okay,
and I can never log into them. And they're blocked. It's blocked on my phone, so I can't create a fake one and look at it.
Do you find yourself having this urge to check them occasionally?
Oh yeah. Okay. Quite often. Like today, Hermione, my amazing publicist who's hiding behind a curtain in this room, was...
She's not always there.
Yeah, she would look at her phone. I was really tempted to go, let me go and look and see what... Because I give my assistant my things I want to tweet, right?
Yeah.
And I wanted to go, I want to see how many retweets did it get? But the minute... this relates to another bit of science by a totally amazing person I got to know called Professor Tim Kasser. So basically, for thousands of years, philosophers said, if you think life is about money and status and showing off, you're going to feel like shit, right? It's not an exact quote from Confucius, but that's basically what he said, right? But no one had scientifically investigated this until Professor Kasser, who's at Knox College in Illinois, he's retired now. And he spent like 30 years researching this. And he basically discovered all human beings have two kinds of motivation. There are intrinsic motives and extrinsic motives. We're all a mixture of both. So you go running, right? Let's say you go running in the morning because you love it. It makes you feel good. You like being healthy. That would be an intrinsic reason to go running, right? It's because it's something you love to do. Okay, now imagine you went running because your dad is a professional runner and he really pressures you and he shames you and he's really embarrassed that you don't run. So you do it to please your dad. That would be an extrinsic reason to do it. Or let's imagine you do it to post shirtless selfies on Instagram of you running, right? Because you want the likes and you want to build your following. That would be, and I would follow that, by the way. Just so you know, that would be an extrinsic reason to do it, right? So you're not doing the thing because it's something you find meaningful. Yeah. You're doing it to get something out of it further down the line, right? Now we're all a mixture of intrinsic and extrinsic motivations. Of course, you have to be, but Professor Kasser showed as time passes, we have become much more driven by extrinsic motives, right? We're much more driven by status, by desire for money. These extrinsic values, what I would call junk values, they're a bit like junk food. We all need a sense of nutrition. We all need nutrition, and junk food appeals to the part of us that needs nutrition, but actually poisons us. Yeah. In the same way, these kind of junk values, which are, hugely metastasized by advertising, by Instagram, by all these things, they appeal to the part of us that needs a kind of set of values to guide us through life, but they give us shitty values that don't make us feel good, right? And the reason I say this in response to this question is, if you want to grow and become a better person because you think that matters, right? Pursue that because you think it matters. If you want to display it on social media, even if you start off as an intrinsic motive, if you start displaying it on social media and getting feedback on social media about it, my suspicion is, I don't think this would be true in every single case, but I know for myself, I'll give you an example. I love reading novels, right? And there was a period where when I read a novel, afterwards, I would tweet about it if I liked it and say, I read a really good book by X. I really recommend everyone else reads it. And at the time I thought, I'm doing this benevolent thing. I'm promoting this novel, I'm helping this author. And that was sincere. It wasn't a lie on my part. That was a bit of my motive. But I realized as I did that, I was starting to choose novels. This will sound good when I tweet about it.
Yeah, right.
And I was starting to go like, even as I was reading the novel, I was thinking, what will I say on Twitter about this that will sound clever? And it was actually this thing that is such an intrinsic motivation for me, something one of my greatest pleasures in life, was becoming poisoned by this extrinsic motivation.
Wow.
And so I would say, don't do it on your social media channels. That's the last place to fucking do it. Do it everywhere else. Have a good life and just look at your social media less. Not everything in life has to be displayed.
Yeah, it's great.
I feel like I struggle with that exact thing you're talking about constantly, even within this podcast, even while, since we've been doing this podcast, I'm proud of the podcast and I want to, broadcast it to as many people as possible because I feel like the people we talk to and the stuff that they say is important. But I do find that when I post about it on social media or I talk about it in some way on that, I do find that there's this it feels like there's this inner contradiction in me, kind of similar to what you're talking about, Johann, as far as tweeting about the books. I do find myself sometimes thinking when I want to talk about, especially if I want to talk about something vulnerably, then I do observe a thought in my head that thinks this is going to sound great in the episode. Or if I put it on Instagram or something like that, I think, this is going to make me look like the most vulnerable. Or it's like that. It's weird when I notice ego in myself when I'm driven by egoic motivations. When it comes from such a pure place that I know is going to be helpful and I know is a worthwhile thing to put out in the world. But when it's coming from me, I can't help but think, well, this is gonna sound clever or this is gonna sound good. And it's really, really, really challenging because I don't want to stop doing it because I know that it's beneficial when I hear other people do it. So I want to keep doing it, but I would be lying if I said that it wasn't driven a little bit by ego.
Yeah, and I think I think you've put that so well. And I think we're all, look, even in the best possible world, we would all wrestle with that to some degree, right? And almost nobody is 100% ego, maybe Donald Trump, and almost nobody is 100% altruism, right? As we know, the Dalai Lama definitely is not. So we're always in there's a natural wrestle with that, but we're living in an environment that is rigging us towards egotism, right? I don't think it's a coincidence Donald Trump won at this moment, right? And it's really interesting because one of the things Professor Kasser discovered is the more you're driven by these extrinsic values, the more likely you are to become depressed and anxious by quite a significant amount. And there's lots of theories about why. It's not entirely clear. One of them seems to be that the more you're driven by extrinsic values, the worse the quality of your relationships becomes. And it becomes partly because you start to judge your relationships by how they appear to other people, not by their inherent value. So to use Trump, I mean, this is a crude example, but you think about Trump, right? So Trump was asked by Howard Stern in an interview long before he ran for president, would you stay with Melania if she was really badly burned in a fire? Wow. And Trump, he's such a repulsive person. He said, it depends. Do her tits get burned?
Whoa.
Right? So you think about, Melania was interviewed on stage at NYU, again before the run for the White House. And she was asked, would you have married Donald Trump if he wasn't rich? And she replied, do you think he would have married me if I wasn't beautiful? So think about what that reveals about what they know about their relationship. She knows if she loses her looks, she's out. He knows if he loses his money, he's out. So you can see how that's an inherently brittle, much more. Whereas Barack and Michelle Obama, I'm sure, would say, "God, we'd love each other even if we became homeless or were burned in fires." You know, so you can see. And okay, Trump is such an extreme example. It's tempted to go, well, that's just a kind of alien, disgusting thing, awful man. But we've all become more like the Trumps, right? We've all become more extrinsic. We're constantly interacting with technologies that are designed to push us towards seeking these extrinsic rewards all the time. And it makes us feel like shit.
And is that because so much of what we're doing, because so much of our life, whether we post about it on social media or not, but we feel so judged all the time, and so much of what we do, every decision of what we wear or what we say or what we eat, everything, it feels like we're being judged more. So then we can't help but kind of base our decisions on what we think other people will think about us.
Yeah, the psychological term for it is self-monitoring. So you start to self-monitor. You're like, I'll give you an example of someone I know. I won't say who it is, but someone I know in Britain who when I met this person 15 years ago, was a lovely, sane, decent person who's got acquired an enormous social media following and has literally gone mad. Right? You can't speak to this person without them literally anticipating how it would sound on Twitter if they said what they just said. Like, I mean, someone who's constantly self-monitoring and anticipating hypercritical voices all the time and constantly in a mode of self-display, anticipating critical voices, and has become quite unpleasant, actually, in the way that this person behaves in public. Because if you're subjected to these just abusive voices all the time, I don't care how nice you are, you're going to become abusive back, right? And it will poison your worldview or poison your way of talking. It's one of the reasons why I have this barrier between these things. If I let those voices into my head, take care what technologies you use, because over time, your internal voices will sound like those technologies. And if I spend a lot of time looking at Twitter, as I did many years ago, if I'm just exposed to angry and abusive voices, my thoughts will become more like angry, abusive voices. And that doesn't go away when you stop looking at the app, right? So it'll repattern your thinking. So I think you're absolutely right. It creates a form of self-monitoring, and there's lots of evidence. Self-monitoring just makes you feel bad, right? We all know that. If you're going for a run and you just like it, I mean, I've never had this experience, but I can imagine there must be such people. But if I'm doing something I love, and then I suddenly, the minute a thought comes in, how will this look to other people? It kills my enjoyment, or at least breaks it for a moment, right? And that's how self-monitoring works, right? If you're, constantly self-monitoring, or even if just self-monitoring goes up, your happiness goes down. So yeah, if you're constantly exposed to feedback, and also it's important to understand, it's not just you're exposed to feedback, you're exposed to feedback in a machinery where the angriest, meanest voices are pushed to the front and nice, kind voices are relegated to the back. So you're actually in a machine where, I remember there was an interview with Lena Dunham. I thought it was really, really sad. It must be, 4 years ago. I think it was in New York Magazine. I don't know Lena Dunham. And what I found so heartbreaking about it is you could see she was in this mode. I think it was Girls hadn't finished yet. And you could see she was in this mode of hyper self-monitoring, right? She was saying a sentence, then she'd apologize for having said it, right? Yeah. It was a time when she was being constantly criticized for like ridiculous kind of moral failings that in my view were not moral failings, right? Not that she's a perfect person, I'm sure, but like the grounds for criticizing her were absurd in my view. But you could see the really terrible thing is that she was taking this feedback online as if it was meaningful social feedback that a friend might offer, right? If one of your friends sits you down and goes, you know what, Ryan, I think you were a bit mean to Bob the other day. That's worth thinking about, right? You've got a friend, they care about you, you're in a relationship with them, and an ongoing friendship with them, that they've got your interests at heart, right? But if some fucking Twitter egg says, I thought your glasses were shit, that's not meaningful feedback, right? But there are some people who have you occasionally get people who just are very, very self-confident. I try to think of someone I know. Ben Goldacre is a brilliant British writer and doctor. he's an unbelievably self-confident person. He seems to be able to just soak up abuse and shit, and it doesn't seem to touch him where he lives, right? He's the only example I can think of someone I actually know who's like that. Most people, you can't soak up abuse and shit and it just not touch you. The person I'm thinking of, who I'm not going to name, has the most common response to that. I think it's a response I had when I used to look at this stuff, which is you can't be ego besieged and just take it, right? You can't just be like, call me a cunt, maybe if you're a masochist or something, but you can't be like, call me a cunt, call me a cunt 100 different ways. You have to build up your own ego to defend yourself, right? You just have to. You have to make your ego bigger to have a wall between you and the abuse. Yeah. But what it produces in the individual who is, I always remember how nice this person was 15 years ago. What it produces is kind of a kind of monstrous narcissism.
Well, the ego's there, even if the abuse isn't pushing against it.
Exactly. That's exactly the right way of putting it. And of course, it's tempting to look at the person and go and morally condemn them and go, God, they've become a prick. But actually, whenever I feel myself thinking that, I go, no, that's not what's happened. Like, in the position of this person, I would be a prick. We'd all be pricks, right? It's a response to an environment. We like to think our personalities are like core inherent parts of ourselves, but so much of them are just responses to the feedback we get in the environments in which we live. Now, I would urge this person, and I have urged this person, to remove themselves from that environment, and they haven't. I'm not saying there's no, agency here. There is. This person hasn't been kidnapped and forced to be on Twitter all the time. But I do think we need to think about these things in relation to what being exposed to that stuff is. I also think, my God, at least the person I'm thinking of was an adult when Twitter was invented. I mean, how much fucking worse would it be if you're, a kid?
I can't even put into words how lucky I feel that I grew up without devices, without social media, because I knew what it was like, and I still crave that feeling of. I do a lot of work in schools, and it's one of the most. When we got so many questions from teachers. So many questions from teachers just saying, what do we do? What are we meant to do here? And parents as well saying with my kids, like, when do we give them a phone? And if they don't have a phone, they're excluded socially, and we don't want that. But then it's a slippery slope.
One thing I think you should recommend, and I can put you in touch with people who've done this in the US and in France, we should just fucking ban cell phones from schools.
100%.
In France, no child is allowed to have a cell phone in school. You've got to put it in your locker. If you have it out, you get fined, right? And they take it away from you for a few days. I went to Berkeley High School just before COVID, where they had done this, and the change was just enormous.
Of course that's happening.
No shit.
If the teacher is having to compete with all the entertainment and information in the world in the child's hand, they're going to fucking struggle, right?
Yeah.
But at least you can give kids, this is not the only thing I'd recommend, but at least you can give kids one place where they have eye contact, where they talk to each other, where they, they're not going to lack for exposure to technology the rest of the time, right? This is why the Chinese government has also severely restricted. I mean, look, I prefer France as a model to the Chinese government. It's not worth having a vile communist tyranny in order to, ban phones and repress the Dalai Lama. But so that's one thing that's easy. Parents love it.
It's not without parallels. Like we ban alcohol for certain ages because we know brains can't handle it. It's not a dissimilar situation.
One of the issues I think we have, when I say one of our schools, we at the Resilience Project, we have a lot of partner schools, and one of our partner schools decided to do just that. No phones at school. And I got a lot of calls from journalists wanting comments on it, and I'd say, yeah, great, really good. And they would put forward these arguments for why it wasn't a good idea. And for everything you've said today, whether it's Rat Park or whatever, I keep thinking, if we lived in a world where love and empathy reigned supreme, and we weren't trying to get views, we weren't trying to get likes, we weren't trying to get validation, we weren't trying to put forward an argument just to try and get people to listen to us, then people wouldn't be calling to say, but what about the fact that they'd just go, do you know what, this is great for kids. We all know it's great for kids, to give them that 6 hours a day where they're not on their phone.
In those examples of banning phones at schools, just following on from what you said before about essentially modeling the behavior as opposed to kind of reprimanding people and saying don't do it, does that include the teachers and parents or whoever else is at the school? Is it sort of a ban for all phones for everyone? Yeah, amazing.
Teachers can't have Teachers
Really?
can't have them either. Yeah. And interestingly, there's some of the staff, if I remember, I went to a couple of schools like this. I think it was at Berkeley High. Some of the staff rebelled initially, but actually realised, I want to have some fucking time when I'm not on my phone as well.
Wouldn't that be
right?
a relief?
I mean, there's a grim coda to it, which is the biggest pushback was, well, what happens if there's a shooting and we can't call the police?
But that's sort of like, even though it's very different, but I now, and for a long time now, have slept with my phone outside my room. Like my phone does not sit next to my bed; it's in the other room. And I remember when I first started doing that, the initial like pushback against myself was like, but what if there's an emergency phone call in the middle of the night? You want to be able to hear it, and that's what so many people say. It's like, well, what if there's an emergency? And it's like, yeah, but when's the last emergency you remembered? Are you willing to kind of have your phone in your hand at all times, 24 hours a day, on the odd chance that every 10 years there's going to be an emergency?
Also, it's a weird, that in itself is I think, justifying addictive behavior and a bit narcissistic. You're not Joe Biden. You don't need to give orders, right? It's okay. The world doesn't need you that much. It can be fine. You can go to sleep, right? It's a weird sort of, also, just have a fucking landline and give people the landline if there's an emergency. It's not that difficult.
Just one carve out of that. Joe Biden does actually listen to our podcast. So in that case, yes.
Okay, well,
but in every other case, yeah.
This could be oversharing. Well, not oversharing. It could be a bit navel-gazing and people might not have any interest in this, but I found it.
The Dalai Lama's my dad.
You do have a bit of a look.
Thanks. I'll pull the hair back. What you were talking about before resonated so strongly with me with the intrinsic thing. I found that whenever I get on a bit of a exercise hit where I might run for a few times for a couple of months, I'm usually pretty good until I tell someone about it. And then as soon as I tell someone, it falls apart pretty quickly. And then I was thinking about, I've been trying to get onto Hugh. We've been trying to get onto each other on the phone for about 5 days now. And one of the things I wanted to talk about was that I'm just feeling like really low confidence with my performance on this podcast. And I was thinking about this interview and wanted to do really well. I'm a huge fan of yours and wanted to really engage and be present and do a good job. And I realized when you were talking before that what's happening is that I haven't had really social media for a long time. The podcast is starting to do it's going well and we're getting some lovely feedback, and I thought I should be engaging in this feedback, seeing what people are saying. And I've had nothing but lovely messages from people and I really appreciate what everyone said. But I realized that I think I'm starting to self-monitor, and I think I'm starting to go, God, I hope I say something that someone likes on this next episode. I hope I get a message from someone saying, I really liked the question you asked, and I realized that it's destroying something that this podcast is something that I've probably the most fulfilling outside of my family and relationships. It's probably the most fulfilling thing I've ever done. And I realized that switch to extrinsic motivation is destroying it because it's making me self-monitor, it's making me self-conscious, and it's making me step out and not be present and just being here and having a good, interesting, fulfilling, rich conversation with people. And it's thank you for bringing that up because I think I'm not sure I can engage. I just don't think I can do social media. I don't think I've got a brain that can handle it, and I think I need to. I can't afford a PA to do it for me, so I think I'm just going to have to get off it for a while because it's really messing with me.
I think you've gone to a really important thing as well, which is something that it took me a long time to realise. Actually, I realised when I was exposed to it, the praise was actually worse for me than the abuse. In a funny way, the praise made me self-monitor more than the abuse. Abuse, I've got a robust enough part of myself that would just go, well, fuck you then. Right? Yeah. Of course it would get into your head. Of course you'd think, oh God. But actually I found the praise threw me off more than the abuse. It's why I never read good or bad reviews of my books. I would really recommend just try for a month, just not looking at any of that feedback.
Yeah.
And you gain time, but most importantly, you gain freedom from that kind of self-monitoring.
Yeah.
I think you'll feel a lot better.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. It was a bit of a moment for me before, so I just want to mention it.
That's really fascinating. That's and obviously I didn't because we haven't been able to talk because we both had babies within 24 hours of each other.
Poor fuckers.
So
we're limited time at the moment.
we call it weird times. We haven't been able to catch each other. But I had a feeling I wanted to talk about something, but I didn't know it was that.
Yeah.
And I find that fascinating because I feel like you, with your work, people don't have an avenue to reach out to tell you how good they think you are, really.
Mm.
And now you've got this through the podcast. People are doing that. I was sitting back thinking, I was going, I'm so happy Josh is getting this now because he deserves this. He deserves this praise he's getting. Little did I know it wasn't.
Well, yeah, I think I little did I know as well. I think I just realised that before, but I think that's exactly what's going on. And I think at first it was awesome. And I really do appreciate the things people are saying because they're really lovely, but I just don't know if my brain can handle it.
Well, and also, like, I sort of think whenever I get a voice in my head that goes, oh, I want this feedback, I sort of think, well, who in my family ever got feedback from, like, the general public, right? My grandmother's job was to clean toilets. People didn't come up to her and go, you know what, you did a fucking thank you, that toilet, right? My dad was a bus driver. Admittedly, he was a terrible bus driver, but people didn't, he got a lot of written complaints, but people didn't come up to him and go like, do you know what, that bus driving, fucking amazing, right? 99.9% of humans do not expect, I mean, actually, it will have changed with social media. Up until the birth of social media, 99.9% of human beings did not go through life expecting to be applauded like actors at the end of a performance, right? They just went through life thinking, well, I find the meaning in what I do. Hopefully, you know, I hope some people notice it and value it. But this kind of idea that random strangers should be always telling you how you're doing is crazy, right? It's not at all what we need as human beings.
I haven't had that. I'm always so moved and happy when people say nice things. I've never once.
It's interesting.
I don't think it's had a negative effect on me ever. In fact, it makes me feel I just love it. I think it's so nice. Not in an ego way. I just think,
I reckon there's an interesting thing here though. Like, if think of us as brothers and that we've got and the differences in our brains, and that use exercise as an example. You've always been extremely good at maintaining a sort of exercise regime, and I think that's because it's an intrinsic motivator that's going on. I've always really struggled with it, and I think that's because there's been extrinsic motivation. So I think there's a predilection for you to have a stronger intrinsic motivation towards things, and I have a sort of maybe a predilection or leaning into this the guilty pleasure of extrinsic motivation, maybe. I don't know. What do you think, Johann?
That seems right to me. And I also think you're going to have this dilemma about your kids. I think about how many people I know who like use their young children as like Instagram props. And you just want to go, no, really don't do that. I'm not saying never share a picture of your child or anything like that, but...
Well, what you said before about how extrinsic motivation, I think I'm paraphrasing and probably getting it much worse than the way you said it, but it destroys that relationship with either the person or the thing that you're doing. In our first episode we ever did, I was listening to it the other day with Missy Higgins. She talked about those Instagram families where they put up like their perfect family and their perfect life and all this stuff.
In Byron Bay and white linen.
In Byron Bay and white linen. And I always thought it was bullshit, but I never really thought that it would actually actively destroy the family itself or that relationship that's going on.
I would say, by definition, someone who is constantly displaying their life on Instagram is unhappy, right? Like, I mean, some of them will be doing it for purely financial reasons. But, you know, after Lost Connections came out, I can't tell you how many messages I got on Instagram from people with like huge Instagram followings, especially after my Depression TED Talk came out, just talking about how miserable they were. And I would flick from the message saying they're really miserable to like, and just see literally 5 minutes before they sent me that message, they did some sort of beaming, perfect looking picture of them having a great life, right? Yeah. It's just, you can see how in a moment in which you have been genuinely happy in life, you did not think, I must now display this to lots of random strangers, right? You just didn't. And in fact, if you had that impulse, then it took you out of the happy moment. So I would almost say that antithetical, that's what's the word for it? Professor Cassie uses, they're orthogonal. They're opposing the desire to externally display yourself. I'm not saying, of course, when I want people to read my book. I want to display my book. In that sense, you want people to listen to your podcast. Of course, it's not about, you're not saying you should never want to attract people to something. But that kind of surface constant display
Yeah.
I can't really see how it can be psychologically healthy.
I've always noticed that there are three things in my life that I never have an urge to share, and they're three of the things that I do the most. And it's running, it's doing talks when I go and do my shows, and it's time with Penny, my wife. They're the three things that when I'm doing those three things, I'm just so happy. And I've noticed there has never once been an urge to share that. And I once ages ago did a post and it said, this is very off brand, but I just wanted to share this. It was just some running stuff because a lot of people don't know that I'm right into it. And I had so many people saying, more of this, please more. I love this so much. But since then, there's three things when I'm in it. It doesn't cross my mind to go, I want people to see how happy Penny and I are right now, whatever we're doing. It just doesn't cross my mind. And I think that to me is the strong intrinsic, the intrinsic pull is so strong that your mind can't possibly go, I better let people see this.
It's like you talked about actors, like the only people that used to get told that they did a great job were actors, Johann, saying like actors at the end of a play or in the theatre, they get applauded. But now our lives have turned into a performance, but there is no separation between the character we're playing and the person that we are. Whereas like actors, there's a very clear difference. It's like, well, I'm playing this character and now I can not be that character and I can go home and I can live my life. But there's no like specific or clear differentiation now. And because we're not only the actor in this performance of life that we're putting on, but we're also like, I can't think of a better word, but like the studio boss or the studio head, where we're seeing what is getting the most traction and then doing more of that. Where it's like it doesn't matter whether we enjoy it or not. It's like, oh well, I never thought I would, show myself doing that, but people really liked that post of the scrambled eggs that I put up. So I'm going to have scrambled eggs again because that performed really well. I don't even really like scrambled eggs. I prefer poached, but why would I have poached when I'm getting so much more traction on the scrambled?
No, you're totally right. And I think that it actually is funny to compare it to actors in the past, because you think about the studio system, you would create a different person. Like Marilyn Monroe would defend herself by going, well, she's Marilyn, I'm Norma Jean, right? That you would kind of acknowledge, and even someone like, with a relatively small public profile like me, I really, even though I do a lot to insulate myself from feedback, it sometimes gets through, right? And oftentimes I have to really go there. I almost want to, this is a very kind of camp way of putting it, but almost like, oh, I'm Norma and they're talking about Marilyn, right? Because this is not, they're not talking about me. So, I've had times when, for each of my books, I've had times when someone has written a kind of aggressive attack on the book and hasn't read the book. So what they do is they create a kind of fantasy version of me that's written this fantasy book that actually you sort of have to go, oh, this isn't about me, So I had, when Lost Connections came out, incredibly, someone wrote a big piece for The Guardian saying that I'd written a book saying everyone should stop taking their antidepressants and this is going to cause people to kill themselves. And he later admitted he hadn't read the book. If he had, he'd know, I obviously don't say that about chemical antidepressants. But it was this, he wrote two articles actually, it was extraordinary. And you have to just go, that's just not about me, right? It can have consequences for you, you've got to correct it as best you can. But you have to go, oh, this person isn't talking about me. But that's, like I'm a robust adult, right? I think about that when I look at my nephews, my godsons, my niece, the teenagers I love. I think, God, that's a fucking hard thing to that's a hard thing to navigate when you're an adult with a fully formed character and personality. That's a fucking hard thing when you've got a sort of creation that's not you. I mean, when we were teenagers, we didn't hear what other people said about us unless they really went out of their way to tell us, right? Yeah. If someone had a conversation at a party about you, unless someone was a bit of a prick and came and told you, you just didn't know. Whereas to be told everything everyone's saying about you, to be able to access it is how do you then do that separation? It's very, very hard, right? To do that, oh, that's not about me. You've got to have a very strong sense of self to go, oh, that's not me, right? And teenagers don't have a strong sense of self. They're forming their sense of self. So yeah, I really worry about that.
So when you arrived here today, you were met at the door by Hells, who's our head of education at the Resilience Project. She pretty much positioned her seat at the door where you walked into. She's been there waiting there for hours, I think, just in case you got here early. She's so excited, and she told you she's a huge fan and got a photo with you and everything, and you made a very funny face for the photo, which I can't wait to look at later. When that happens to you, does it feel nice, or are you at a point where you kind of, I mean, this is a little bit off topic, I'm just curious, or does it just go, oh, that just happened and it doesn't, is it a nice thing, does it register as a positive experience, or does it not really register for you?
I think I have two conflicting internal voices. I have one internal voice that's like, that's nice, there's this person who's connected with my work, and that's lovely.
On the other side of the world.
And I feel really touched by that. And there's another part of me that's like, don't be a big-headed cunt, discount it, don't think about it, push it away. I don't mean push the individual away, but
the compliment.
But just don't. Partly that's a British thing. You're sort of trained as a British person to never acknowledge compliment. You know, if you think about the face the Queen does whenever she's complimented, she just does a completely blank face and goes, yes. Right? And so as a British person, you're partly trained to do that. That kind of very, I spend a lot of my life in the US, and I've tried to really learn. You actually can't do that in the US. It's insulting to the person who's complimented you to just make a self-deprecating joke, undercut what they've said.
Yeah.
They take that as an insult to them, quite rightly.
Yeah.
But I think I try to bank the nice bit and then go, my job is to write books, and I go and find things out and write books about them. And when I feel good about what I've done, it's when I feel like I've been a concierge connecting a group of people who need to know something with people who discover something interesting about it. So like Bruce Alexander, who did the Rat Park experiment, I'm genuinely proud that lots more people heard about Bruce's amazing work because I talked and wrote about it, and that he's had a real renaissance, and he's in his 80s and he's such a fundamentally good and brilliant man. And that makes, when people come up to me and they talk about Rat Park, and I picture Bruce, and I picture the day I met him, and I think, God, I've done a good thing. This person, I've introduced Bruce to this person and Rat Park and all the stuff they need to know about it. That's when it feels good. It can become quite extrinsic if you start getting into the ego thing of like, so I really, really try to, I don't know what the word is, have very strong voices undercutting any praise I ever receive about myself. Okay. And I really try to limit hearing it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Terrific question from Roland here. What's a healthy way to reset as we're human and we will fall off the bandwagon? I'm assuming he's talking about addiction to technology here. Do you have a system that works for you as a weekly reset or something like that? He wrote something like that. It sounded like I was a bit of a fade out with my question there, but he wrote something like that. Is there any system you've got to?
Yes.
Is there any system?
I got that.
Really threw him under the bus.
Sorry, Roland.
Time for you to be switched off and switched on again to reset you. So I think there's lots of ways to reset, but one is to build in like regular sustained breaks. I would say buy a case safe. You mentioned them before. So people who didn't hear that episode, a case safe is plastic safe. You take off the lid, you put in your phone, you put on the lid, you turn the dial, it locks away your phone. But anything between 5 minutes and a whole day. I would say try to have one day a week where, a Sunday, I mean, your job may not allow that, but if your job does, try to have at least, you can build up to a day. Try having an hour a week if you're really in the throes of the compulsion, and try to build that up over time. So I would say a good way to reset is just go for a walk for an hour a day without your phone. Particularly if you can walk in nature. Nature is a great way to reset is to induce what are called states of awe. So a state of awe is when you see something beautiful or amazing and you suddenly have a sense that you're small and the world is big, right? And that's a really profound resetting experience, because at the moment, it's like we have a kind of ego itching powder poured on us all the time. Constantly, if you just look at a Twitter feed, it feels like everyone is talking about you, right? When in fact, fucking no one's talking about you. Like in the scale of humanity, no one is talking about you, right? Even if you're Joe Biden, on the scale of humanity, not that many people are talking about you. So feelings of awe, things that usually induce awe, are beautiful things in nature, staring at the night sky. We can all think about things that give us a sense
and they
of
are
awe.
everywhere, but we've sort of lost connection with them, to use them.
Exactly. Good title.
My daughter the other day said she was at her grandparents' house and she said the moon, we could see the moon there. And I said, yeah, me too. And she said, no, we could see the moon. It was at our grandparents' house. Like she didn't, and she said, well, hang on. And I tried to explain we both could. And she said, what is it? And I explained to her what it was. And it was this moment of awe of like, it's this ginormous rock that just turns up at like, it's extraordinary.
Yeah.
And actually explaining it to her, I was actually thinking about the exact thing that we are constantly, the moon comes up every night and then we rarely pay attention to how unbelievable that is. Stuff like that.
Yeah, so I would say seek out states of awe, beauty in nature, mind wandering. Those are good ways to reset.
As well as Stolen Focus, of course. There's a great book about that. But there's a book that I've just started reading, which is, I don't know if you've heard about it, Johann, the 12-Hour Walk. Do you know that book? The Colin O'Brady.
No, I don't know this.
It's a guy who essentially went for a walk for 12 hours without any stimulus and just sort of spent 12 hours by himself. No talking to anyone, no looking at phone, no looking at anything, just essentially and it was life-changing for him and for lots of other people who did it. But we'll put a link to it. I won't try and explain what the book's about, but
I should write a version called The 45-Minute Walk That Ends at KFC, and it'll be that'll be my rival version.
Yeah, I reckon it would sell better.
Exactly.
This is not a question from an audience member. What's your favourite KFC meal?
Oh, it's got to be just a bucket with lots of chicken thighs and lots of chicken drumsticks, obviously. How could you even ask me that question? Just look at my chins, you know the answer.
No. Okay, let's finish with this question because we have gone for a while here and you've been very, very generous with your time and travel coming all the way down into Melbourne. But, so this is from J.R. Mullaney and the question is, and I think I know what your answer will be and it worries me a bit, but do you think over time there'll be a natural correction over time where society will embrace real experiences more and be better able to control distractions?
It is entirely up to us and what we do now. The way I think of it is we're in a race. At the moment, these technologies are poised to become more powerful and more manipulative. You know, Paul Graham, one of the biggest investors in Silicon Valley, said the world is on course to be more addictive in the next 40 years than it was in the last 40. Think about how much more addictive TikTok is than Facebook, right? I can now imagine the next crack-like iteration of TikTok in the metaverse. So that's one part of the race. They are racing to get better and better at this, and they are fucking good at it. And I interviewed lots of people in Silicon Valley who are designing the next wave. On the other side of the race, you know, there's got to be a movement of all of us.
There's you.
No, there's everyone in the society who doesn't like to live like this, right? And which is almost all of us, which is not to say we don't like some aspects of the technology. We do. Of course, we want to retain them. There's got to be a big part of the society saying, no, this is not a good life. No, we don't want to live like this. No, we don't want our children to be exposed to technologies that are specifically designed to hack and invade their attention. No, we choose a better life than this, right? And we can do that in all sorts of very practical ways. I went to places that have begun that journey, from New Zealand to France. I go through lots of things in the book that we can do to both at a social level and at an individual level to get to that better place. If there isn't that counterforce in the race, if we just give up, well, the invasive technologies will win by default, right? And they'll become more and more and more sophisticated. But it doesn't have to be that way, right? We've taken on much bigger challenges than this. I think I might have mentioned it last time we spoke, but Dr. James Williams, who worked at the heart of Google, was horrified by what he'd done, quit and became, I would argue, the most important philosopher of attention in the world. He said to me, the axe existed for 1.4 million years before anyone said, guys, should we put a handle on this thing? The entire internet has existed for less than 10,000 days, right? We can fix this shit. It's not that hard, right? The technology exists to do it. The knowledge exists to do it. We have democratic governments, hard-won democracies. We are the free citizens of democracies. We own our own minds. We can take them back from these forces if we want to. So the answer to your question is, it won't just happen by default. You know, Elizabeth Warren, American politician, always says, in politics, you don't get what you don't fight for, right? We've got to decide, do we value attention? Is it important to us? Do we want our children to be able to focus? If we do, we've got to fight for it. There are forces stealing it. The book is called Stolen Focus because it's being stolen from us. It didn't collapse. It didn't just sort of spontaneously fall apart. It was actively stolen, and not just by big tech, by lots of other forces that I write about in the book. So we've got to decide, are we willing to fight for it? If we're willing to fight for it, we can win this one, right? But we've got to fight for it.
And I guess like the kind of sad thing is, which I've just sort of realized, is with our own individual personal social media accounts, we are kind of unconsciously fighting for the same attention that the media companies are fighting for. Like, we're treating our social media feed as it's like, oh, how can I get people's attention the best? How can I get the like or the comment? Like, and by doing that, we're adding to the problem where it's like we've got like there's billions of people with their own little mini channels. Like there's the Sydney Morning Herald, and then there's Channel 7. There's all these different things, but then our individual lives are now being treated as like content guns that are trying to win your attention as well. So it's like we're all kind of working against ourselves in that way.
We're fighting for the wrong side.
Well, we're like the paparazzi for ourselves. I was thinking about this on the flight out. I watched that film Spencer. I don't know if you've seen it, about Princess Diana. Yeah. I'm not good at judging films that I watch on planes because I get really emotional watching films on planes. So I can't tell if it's good, but I cried a lot. I think it was quite good actually. But I was thinking as I watched it, you know, when Princess Diana died in 1997 and the paparazzi stood outside the car where she was dying and took photos of her in her final moments, we were absolutely disgusted. It was like global outrage. Tomorrow, if God forbid, I don't know, Kate or Meghan Markle were in a car accident, every single fucking person standing around would take out their phones and start filming it. Yeah. We've all become the force that we hated, right? I don't think that's an exaggeration, is it? Everyone would film it, wouldn't they?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
What an incredible thing that we've descended to the point where we've become the thing that we recoiled from not that long ago. What is it, 25 years since Diana died? Something like that. So you see how that coarsening has happened. Yeah. But we don't have to tolerate that, right? This is the product of environments. We can deal with those environments. And in some ways I'm optimistic. There are some problems that are insoluble and some problems that are really fucking hard to solve. The climate crisis is really hard to solve. This is not that hard to solve, right? These are relatively recent changes. We can remember the time before them, right? And we're not that old. I absolutely believe we can deal with these things if we do the right things. There are much bigger changes than this that have happened. I'm just reading a book about 1970s Australia, and it's a biography of your worst prime minister, Billy McMahon. But it's a very funny book. But I don't know why I'm reading it. But it's very much. And but what's really striking is you read about 1970s Australia. There's no women. They're just not there, right? There's no women in the cabinet. There's no women in the government, right? And you think how recent that was and how bizarre that seems to us now, right? I'm not saying there isn't still a huge way to go, and we all remember the horrendous way Julia Gillard was treated, but you can see how quickly things like that can change, right? Yeah. So that things that were completely taken for granted become unthinkable in the space of a generation, right? So we can totally deal with these things. We can get to a really good future on this, but we're going to have to act, and we're going to have to understand what's doing it to us, and we're going to have to act. I think that's a lovely place to end, because I feel like I could run through a brick wall after that. I really love that. Run into a brick wall, which is unfortunate after I've been talking about Princess Diana's terrible death. So.
All right. She's huge.
I once can I say the most name dropping thing I can possibly say, which is weirdly I'm friends with Elton John, and I once asked him if I die, will you come to my funeral and perform a version of Candle in the Wind? And he paused for a minute and he said, if it's a really slow week, I've got nothing else on and I happen to be nearby, maybe. Which I'm taking as a win. Yeah. Right?
That's huge.
Exactly. Victory.
Yeah.
I feel like people listening right now, if they're in their cars or at home, wherever they are, I would love them just to reflect for a minute on things that they could do at a personal level to maybe take back a little bit of control.
I thought you were going to say I'd like them to reflect on how unlikely it is that Elton John will perform at their funerals.
Yeah, well, I thought you were going to say put on Candle in the Wind.
Exactly.
I will say, on the record, Johann, if Elton John plays at your funeral, then I'll come.
Okay, fair enough.
I certainly have been reflecting throughout this chat on moments when I feel happiest. In 2 or 3 nights a week, I put my phone in the case safe from, after your advice, put it in from 5 till 9. That's a really hard point of my day, really difficult, getting the kids ready for dinner and then getting ready for bed, and they're exhausted and they're crying and it's really tough. And that is the time when I check my phone most, just to escape it for a millisecond. I'll be in the bath and I'll have a quick look, or I just want to escape what's going on. But the nights that I don't do it, I'm so much happier. And so I'm not saying everyone put your phone in the case safe from 5 till 8, but just whatever emotions this has elicited in you, this chat, or whatever memories it's conjured up for you, whatever feelings you've had around when you feel happiest. I'm sure you've been reflecting on the times that you have gone for a walk without your phone, or you accidentally left it at home, you realise you really enjoyed that. I just think it'd be nice that I've maybe try and put something concrete into place where you are, because that's what I'm going to do. I want to go back to really making sure 4 or 5 nights a week. It's a small thing for me, but I think we can all make small changes to
fight back.
To try and wrestle a little bit of control back. Yeah, absolutely. Johann, you are the most magnificent man. I just feel so...
It's so nice to see that you exist in 3 dimensions. It's amazing. I really enjoyed this. Thank you so much.
No.
I know, well...
This is a very special moment for us, and I think when hopefully this podcast journey goes on for a long time, but I know we'll look back on this with very fond memories. It is... we love you, and we're so happy that you're here.
Yeah. Thanks, Johann. We love you.
You see, now I've got that British thing where I can't...
Yeah.
I have to just go... Yes.
Thanks, Queen.
That's all I can do. Right? And she looks really pissed off when you praise her, the Queen, as well. Like, yes. It's always like a contemptuous yes. It's not even like, yes, thank you. It's like, yes, I know. Right? It's like I'm on the fucking money. I know. Right? It's bad enough, by the way, it's bad enough that Britain has a monarchy, but that you have our fucking monarchy, you've got to get a grip, Australia. I'm sorry.
Very strange.
Yeah, this is not acceptable. You need to pull yourselves together. I'm sorry.
In fact, I learnt the other day that if we get rid of the monarchy, we still get to compete in the Commonwealth Games. So I was like, what are we doing then? I thought that was the only reason we're staying, so we could be in the Commonwealth Games.
What is the reason then? Yeah.
I think you should have a randomly selected koala should be your head of state. And it should alter every time the koala dies. It should be like the Dalai Lama. It should reincarnate the presidency of Australia in another.
Just a stoned, because they're just
exactly.
stoned all out.
Well, they're lazy fuckers, aren't they?
Well, they get stoned off the eucalyptus, so that's a great motto.
But aren't they asleep for like 22 and a half hours a day or something? And when I learned that, I was like, why are we putting in all this fucking effort to save them if they won't even... Come on, koalas. Get a bit of fucking... Get on your bike. Get a bit of game. If you're not going to put any effort, I'm not going to save you from all these fires. I'm sorry.
It's a two-way street.
Come on now.
Exactly, yeah.
Pull yourselves together.
That's an even better note to finish on.
Exactly. I meant to say my amazing publicist Hermione, who's so great, is in the room.
Yes.
And I want to just express massive love for her because she's amazing. And she always tells me to say this at the end, so I'm going to. If you want to know where to get more information about any of the books we've talked about or the audiobooks, you can go to johannhari.com, where you can see links to all of them.
Every podcast episode you've been on with us, well, the other 2, you've had to say that. And every time afterwards, I think if I was more of a professional host, I would have done that for him. He would have really appreciated that. So I apologise. I missed it again.
Okay.
We'll do it on the 4th one.
We'll do it on the 4th one.
Excellent.
Yeah, when we're in London next year, we'll do that. Yeah.
Hooray.
Thanks, Johann.
Send my love to Britain,
Johann.
Ryan.
I sure will.
Great. Cheers.
If this episode has been triggering for you, we strongly recommend Lifeline on 131114. The Imperfects is hosted and co-produced by Hugh Van Cuylenberg, Brian Shelton and Josh Van Cuylenberg. This episode was produced by Bridget Northeast, filmed by Andy Poole and edited by George Martin. A special thanks to Dr. M for her expertise and guidance. We'd also like to thank the Resilience Project for their ongoing support.